During the annual crab migration, all of Christmas Island is seeing red.
On Christmas Island, a small Australian territory in the Indian Ocean, and tens of millions of crabs appear for their annual migration. The human population,
a tiny invader nearly erased an entire island. On Christmas Island, the world-famous red crab migration was suddenly ambushed by an army of yellow crazy ants. Swarming in numbers no one had ever recorded before. Forest floors blistered with their venom.
Crazy ants have been responsible for declining the red crab population from 80 to 120 million down to about 40 million. So they've had a massive impact on the red crab population.
Crabs died by the thousands. Birds dropped from trees.
Because of their numbers, they can dominate a lot of food sources and outcompete other species.
The ecosystem buckled so fast, scientists feared the island itself would fail. They deployed a last resort weapon to stop the ants. And what happened next stunned even the experts who created it. Paradise on the edge, the island that should have been untouchable. The first thing a person feels when they face Christmas Island is a sense of unease. The island rises from the ocean like a massive wall of rock. It looks like something that broke loose from another world. Nothing about it feels gentle. The steep cliffs hold back a thick rainforest that seems to breathe on its own. The trees stretch upward and outward as if they are guarding something hidden deep inside. The forest is full of sounds that come from creatures that do not exist anywhere else. It is a place shaped by millions of years of isolation. Every living thing on this island grew and changed without outside influence. The result is an ecosystem that is quite strange and intense. Bright red land crabs once dominated this isolated world. Their shells shone like wet paint, and their legs clicked across the forest floor in endless numbers. These crabs were not minor creatures. They acted as the main workers of the entire forest. They dug into the soil and kept it loose. They ate huge piles of dead leaves and broken branches. They kept plants in check with steady feeding. They controlled the entire balance of the forest without ever being fully noticed by visiting humans. For most of the year, the forest lives under their quiet control. Everything depends on them, even the trees. But when the rainy season arrives, the peace of the island changes. Heavy monsoon clouds roll in from the sea. Warm rain soaks the entire island. That rain acts like a signal for the crabs. They come out of the forest in numbers that stun anyone who sees them. People who live on the island have to close roads because the ground becomes covered with moving crabs. Tourists stand along the roads and watch the red tide of crawling bodies. The forest floor shifts under the enormous mass of animals. Every crab moves toward the ocean with one purpose. They release their eggs into the sea and create a new generation. The event is so overwhelming that even experienced naturalists speak of it with disbelief. David Attenborough once says that this movement of crabs is one of the greatest wildlife scenes he has ever witnessed. The island seems alive in a way that does not resemble anything seen in other parts of the world. It feels like watching an ancient ritual performed exactly the same way for countless generations. But while the crabs marched and the forest followed its ancient patterns, something else began to take hold on the island. People did not see it in the early years. Scientists did not know it was there. Rangers did not know it was spreading. The threat arrived quietly. It hid in shipping crates and supplies. It clung to objects transported by boats that crossed the ocean. It crept into the forest with small movements that nobody noticed. It hid in soil and cracks in trees. It moved at night and avoided sunlight. It reproduced in the ground where no one could see it. It increased its numbers with silent speed while the island carried on with its usual rhythm. This new life form did not charge forward in the open the way the red crabs did. It worked with secrecy. It had a chemical weapon inside its body that allowed it to burn and kill with shocking efficiency. It gathered in hidden places. It waited for its population to grow. It moved through leaf litter and between tree roots. It entered areas that had always belonged to the crabs. Little did anyone know that this unseen intruder would soon challenge the very heartbeat of the island, setting the stage for an ecological battle of unimaginable scale. The Acid Army: How Yellow Crazy Ants Turned Paradise into a War Zone. The intruder, locally known as the yellow crazy ant, looked harmless at first glance. It was small and thin. It moved with quick twitching motions that seemed almost confused. Anyone who saw one ant on its own easily assumed it was just another tiny insect living in a hot tropical forest. Nothing about its size or behavior suggested power. Nothing suggested danger. Yet inside this small body was a weapon that made it one of the most destructive creatures on Christmas Island. The yellow crazy ant carries formic acid inside its body. Formic acid is a chemical that burns living tissue. It can destroy eyes. It can eat through soft joints. It can kill animals that are much larger than the ant itself. This chemical allows the yellow crazy ant to injure and kill with shocking ease. The true threat appeared only when these ants formed groups. They did not behave like normal insects. They did not live in scattered nests that acted independently. Once they became established in a new area, they formed what scientists call super colonies. A super colony is a massive network of nests that work together as if they are one single creature. Billions of ants follow shared cues and move with the same goal. They spread through soil, leaf litter, and tree trunks. They cover everything around them. They push out other animals. They operate like a biological machine that never rests. The red crabs that once ruled the forest could not survive an encounter with these ants. The crabs had strong shells, but they were slow. They could not escape the fast-moving ants. When a crab walked into an area controlled by a super colony, the ants climbed over its legs and claws within seconds. The ants sprayed formic acid into the crab's eyes. They sprayed the acid into the soft spaces between the crab's joints. The acid caused immediate pain. The crabs became disoriented. They spun in circles. Their eyes burned until they could no longer see. Their bodies stiffened. Within minutes, the crabs lost control of their movements. Many collapsed soon after. Within a few hours, most of them died. Once one area of forest lost its crabs, the death spread to the next area. Entire stretches of rainforest soon became filled with the bodies of dead crabs. Rangers found millions of them. By the time the destruction slowed, tens of millions of red crabs had been killed. That loss represented about 1/3 of the total crab population on the island. The death of the crabs created a chain reaction throughout the entire environment. The crabs once cleaned the forest floor. They removed piles of fallen leaves. They ate seedlings that tried to grow too close together. They kept the soil open. Without the crabs, the forest floor changed rapidly. Thick layers of leaf litter collected in places where the crabs once cleared it. Young plants grew in dense clumps. They crowded each other and blocked out light. The forest became harder to move through. Many birds lost areas where they once built their nests because the ants attacked them. Small mammals and lizards were also killed by the ants. The ants sprayed formic acid into their eyes and mouths. Many died quickly. The entire structure of the island's ecosystem began to twist in dangerous ways. Areas that once supported many species became empty. Other areas became overcrowded with plants that usually stayed under control. The island's rangers tried to fight the ants. They spread poison bait along the ground. They flew helicopters over the forest and dropped small granules that contained a chemical known as fipronil. The treatment slowed the ants for a short time. Some nests fell apart. Some sections of the super colonies weakened. Yet the ants always returned. They survived in areas that were not reached by the poison. They rebuilt their numbers quickly. They spread outward again and again. It became clear that the fight was not simple. Christmas Island was slowly losing control of its own environment. The enemy was multiplying much faster than humans could stop it. Scientists knew that they needed more than just simple poison. They needed to understand the deeper reason behind the ants' success. They needed to uncover the hidden source of the ants' incredible growth. That realization would influence every decision that followed in the growing war. The hidden partners. How tiny scale insects secretly powered an ant empire. The breakthrough did not come from watching the yellow crazy ants. It came from looking at what they were eating. For a long time, scientists focused on the ants themselves. They studied the chemical they carried. They studied the size of their colonies. They studied their behavior. None of these studies explained how the ants gained so much power so quickly. The real answer came from another part of the forest. It came from a creature that looked harmless. It came from something that most people would overlook because it appeared small and weak. These creatures were known as yellow sac-scale insects. They were soft-bodied. Their bodies were round and pale. They clung tightly to tree trunks and branches. They did not move much. They seemed like tiny bumps on bark. At first, they were not seen as a major force on the island. They were not fast. They were not aggressive. Yet they carried a dangerous impact because of the way they fed. These insects sucked sap from trees. Sap is the liquid that trees rely on to transport nutrients. When the insects fed on the sap, they kept only what they needed for themselves. They released the rest as a sugary liquid known as honeydew. Honeydew is thick and sweet. It contains large amounts of energy. The yellow crazy ants discovered that the honeydew was an excellent food source. The ants became attached to the scale insects because the honeydew allowed them to survive and expand. The ants did not treat the scale insects as random insects. They behaved as if the insects were cattle. They protected them from beetles and other predators. They moved them to parts of trees where sap was plentiful. They allowed the scale insects to multiply and spread across the forest. The ants gained an endless supply of sugar. The insects gained complete protection. Together, they formed a strong and destructive relationship. The scale insects caused massive damage on their own. When they sucked sap from the trees lost strength. Leaves began to wilt. Branches weakened and snapped during storms. The honeydew that the insects released coated many leaves. The sticky liquid created a perfect environment for dark mold to grow. This mold spread across entire sections of the forest canopy. Leaves that should have been able to gather sunlight became covered in black and brown patches. Trees lost their ability to survive. Many died during dry periods. The forest began to thin in areas that once supported thriving plant life. Christmas Island was not being destroyed by a single invader. It was being attacked by two different species that worked together in a way that made the damage much worse. Rangers tried to kill the ants, but these efforts did not remove the scale insects. The insects survived on their tree hosts. This allowed the ants to return. When people attempted to remove the scale insects, the ants protected them. Poison treatments did not break the system because the system fed itself. The ants supported the insects. The insects fed the ants. Efforts to remove one partner did not destroy the other. The cycle repaired itself every time. Scientists began to understand that their entire strategy needed to change. The only way to stop the ants was to stop the source of their food. The only way to stop the source of their food was to weaken or destroy the scale insects. This idea changed the direction of the fight. The new approach required something very small. It required something that could move into the tight spaces where the insects hid. It required something that would attack the insects without harming the rest of the island. The assassin arrives, the microscopic wasp designed by nature to stop an ecological collapse. The search pushed the scientists deep into Southeast Asia. That region held natural populations of the same scale insects. These insects lived there without destroying forests. They lived there without causing massive tree deaths. They lived there without helping ants take over entire ecosystems. Something in Southeast Asia was keeping the scale insects controlled. It was something small enough to reach them on tree bark. It was something specialized enough to hunt them while ignoring other creatures. It was something deadly to them and harmless to everything else. For years, scientists traveled to forests, plantations, and protected areas. They watched the trees carefully. They examined branches, leaves, and trunks. They collected samples of insects. They recorded what creatures interacted with the scale insects. They began this careful work in 2009. They continued it because they knew that the success of the entire restoration project depended on discovering a natural enemy. The breakthrough came in Malaysia after patient observation and detailed study. The creature that controlled the scale insects was a tiny parasitic wasp known as Tachardiophagus somervillei. This name described a wasp that measured only 2 millimeters in length. It did not harm humans. It did not sting people. It did not cause fear when seen in the open. Most people would never notice it because it was so small. Yet this wasp possessed a deadly impact on the scale insects. It was extremely specialized. It focused entirely on the yellow lac scale insects because those insects provided everything it needed for survival. The way the wasp attacked the scale insects was extremely precise. The adult female wasps searched the bark of trees for scale insects. They used thin, needle-like structures at the end of their bodies to pierce the soft bodies of the scale insects. Once they pierced them, the wasps released several eggs into the insects. Most female scale insects received up to 8 eggs at a time. Inside the scale insect, the eggs opened. Tiny larvae emerged. These larvae fed on the inside of the scale insect until the host became nothing more than a hollow body. When the larvae reached full development, they left the dead scale insect and continued the cycle. One adult wasp could attack more than 150 scale insects in its lifetime. This meant that even a small population of wasps could remove a large population of scale insects over time. But before the wasp could be used on Christmas Island, scientists needed to ensure complete safety. They placed the wasps in controlled tests with many different insects from various environments. The wasps ignored all species except the yellow lac scale insects. Additional tests examined how the ants reacted to the wasps. Even when the yellow crazy ants protected the scale insects, the wasps still found ways to inject their eggs into the insects. This demonstrated that the wasps could survive and function in the hostile conditions of the infested forest. Environmental specialists reviewed detailed reports. They studied the possible long-term consequences of releasing the wasps. Public meetings were held to explain the plan. All of this evaluation was important because biological control programs must be safe and responsible. After years of careful examination, the Australian government approved the introduction of the wasps. This approval process became known as one of the most thoroughly evaluated biological control efforts the country had ever conducted. In 2016, scientists transported 167 adult wasps from Malaysia to Christmas Island. These wasps traveled under strict supervision by national biosecurity officers. They were handled with extreme care because each wasp represented a future generation that could help restore the island. Almost all of them survived the journey. Their survival gave the scientists great hope. So they moved to the next stage, which was building a strong wasp population. Breeding an army, the secret facilities that raised millions of microscopic warriors. To increase the small group of imported wasps into a population large enough to fight the yellow crazy ants, the rangers of Christmas Island National Park built special rearing enclosures. These structures were not simple cages. They were controlled environments that scientists carefully designed to copy the natural conditions found in the Southeast Asia. The temperature inside these enclosures remained warm and stable. The humidity stayed at a level that the scale insects needed to survive. The airflow was gentle. The light cycle followed a pattern that matched the forests where the scale insects and wasps originally lived. Every detail mattered because the wasps and scale insects were highly sensitive to environmental changes. If anything felt wrong, the insects might refuse to feed, reproduce, or develop properly. Inside the enclosures, scientists planted the exact types of vegetation that the scale insects preferred. These included plant species that produced sap with the correct consistency and nutrient content. Once these plants reached the right stage of growth, researchers introduced healthy colonies of scale insects. They placed the insects on leaves and stems. They made sure the insects were feeding normally. Only once these colonies were stable did they release the founding wasps that had been transported from Malaysia. The goal was to recreate the conditions the wasps needed to find the scale insects, lay eggs inside them, and produce new generations at a steady rate. The results inside the rearing enclosures were extremely promising. The wasps located the scale insects quickly. They pierced the insects without hesitation. They laid their eggs efficiently. Newly emerged wasps appeared in every enclosure. The numbers increased exactly as the scientists had predicted. The wasps did not attack other insects in the enclosures. They ignored anything that was not a yellow lac-scale insect. They behaved with complete precision. The system worked so well that many researchers described it as the first real turning point in the long fight to save the island. By 2017, the population of wasps inside the controlled environment had become strong enough for field release. A total of 8,000 wasps were released into 4 of the most severely infested regions on the island. These regions included Grantswell, Blowholes, Margaret Knoll, and the circuit tracks. Some of these wasps were placed directly into areas controlled by super colonies of ants. Others were moved into larger breeding pens that had been constructed within sections of the rainforest. These extended pens created safe zones where the wasps could continue to reproduce while being exposed to real forest conditions. The goal was to create additional waves of wasps that could spread outward from these protected zones. The effect of biological control does not appear immediately. It unfolds slowly because the wasps must locate scale insects, parasitize them, and produce new generations that then repeat the cycle. The scientists were aware of this and monitored every detail with close attention. They observed the number of ants present in each area by counting ants per square meter. They measured the density of scale insects on branches and trunks. They tracked the survival and reproduction of the wasps. They checked for unusual interactions with native wildlife. They looked for signs of unexpected damage. None of these problems appeared. The wasps behaved exactly as they had behaved in the controlled environment. They hunted only the yellow lac-scale insects. They showed the same level of precision that made them so valuable. As the wasp population increased in the forest, the number of scale insects began to fall. Areas that once held thick layers of honeydew-producing insects started to clear. Trees with heavy infestations began to recover. As the scale insects disappeared, the ants started to lose their most important food source. Without a constant supply of honeydew, the ant colonies began to grow weaker. Their movements slowed. Their workers appeared in smaller numbers. The once unstoppable super colonies showed early signs of decline. The hidden conflict between wasps and scale insects had started. This conflict created pressure that pushed directly against the ant invasion. The war had begun, however. The ultimate proof would not come from scientific measurements alone. The true test would come from the island's most famous species. The success or failure of the entire strategy would eventually be revealed by the response of the animals that once shaped the forest. Their return or continued decline would show the world whether the balance of power had finally begun to shift. The Red Comeback: How millions of crabs returned as the ant empire fell. When the first tiny battalions of assassin wasps spread through the forests of Christmas Island, biologists watched with tense anticipation. For decades, the island had been changed beyond recognition. The red crabs, once the rulers of the forest floor, had been reduced to a fraction of their original numbers. Their deaths had transformed the forest. Leaf litter piled up unchecked. Seedlings choked each other. Trees weakened and died. Birds, reptiles, and small mammals had vanished from areas dominated by ants. The entire ecosystem had been warped by the relentless invasion of yellow crazy ants and their sugar-producing scale insect partners. Scientists had worked for years to introduce the wasps, carefully growing their numbers and releasing them into the forest. Now the moment of truth had arrived. Would these tiny insects be able to change the balance and allow the red crabs to return? At first, monitoring showed stability rather than dramatic change. Migration counts for the crabs remained similar to previous years. Around 40 to 50 million adult crabs crossed the roads and forest floors during the annual mass migration. There were no immediate spikes. It seemed as if decades of devastation might be too much to reverse quickly. Yet the wasps were quietly doing their work. They hunted the scale insects with the same deadly precision observed in laboratories. The scale insect populations began to decline. Without an endless supply of honeydew, the ant supercolonies slowly weakened. Their dominance over the forest floor diminished. They became less numerous and less aggressive. This slow weakening went unnoticed at first, but it was the crucial turning point. Year by year, the crabs began to respond. With fewer ants attacking them and with more natural food available, juvenile crabs survived at higher rates. Adults lived longer, mating success increased. The populations that had been teetering on the edge began to rise steadily. By 2024, the results were nothing short of astonishing. The annual red crab migration soared to 100 million individuals. That was more than double the population recorded before the biocontrol project began. Roads that had once been empty or covered with dead shells were now alive with bright red legs and shells. The forest floor trembled with their movement. Tourists and scientists returned in large numbers, eager to witness the spectacle that had once been nearly lost. The recovery went far beyond numbers. The forest itself began to heal. Leaf litter was consumed at natural rates once more, exposing soil that could breathe and hold moisture. Seedlings no longer crowded each other, allowing new trees to grow properly. Soil health improved as crab activity redistributed nutrients and aerated the ground. Mold outbreaks caused by honeydew deposits and scale insect activity diminished. Even other invasive species, such as giant African snails, began to decline as the forest regained its natural resilience. The invisible web of life that had been fraying slowly restored itself under the careful work of these tiny biocontrol agents and the returning crabs. Today, no one claims complete victory. Small colonies of yellow crazy ants still exist in remote areas, lurking in the shadows of the canopy and in hidden pockets of the forest. Yet the overall balance of the ecosystem has shifted decisively. The forests are recovering. The crabs are once again the rulers of the forest floor. The assassin wasps, invisible to the human eye, continue their silent patrols among the branches and trunks, hunting scale insects and keeping the ant populations in check. The war is not over, but the battle is gradually being won,